Lena Black Gemara. Today is Daf Monday. Erev Rosh Hashanah is Daf Tes. We will learn today Daf Tes and Daf Yud for the Rosh Hashanah as well. We'll just pause for a few seconds in between. We're up to the Gemara here. At the bottom of the page of Zion on the base, and we're going through. The Mishnah said that there are two kabbalas that are exception. That if you shechted it shaloi lishmoi, not having the right carbon in mind, the carbon actually becomes possible. All other kabbalas we say continue bringing it up, but the owner has to bring, fulfill the promise to bring another carbon. But chatzos, carbon pesach bismane, in the time between chatzos and nighttime, if you had the wrong carbon in mind, it's possible the whole carbon. So now we're going to find out how do we know that. And bearing in mind, the rule is by kabbalas, shana olav hakasav la'akev, which means different than other places. If the Torah tells you to do something, it's only lechatchila. If the Torah wants to say that this is even b'di'evet, it's the only way that's going to be kosher, then the Torah has to repeat itself somewhere. Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom of Zion on Beis. Chatas min al hayno chatas. Apostle see it says v'shochat oisalich chatas. Says you should shecht it to lich chatas for a carbon chatas. So we learn out from there that shetehei shchita lishem chatas. When you shecht the carbon, it has to be for the sake of a chatas. So you should place your hand on the head of the chatas and you should shecht it for a chatas. The same place you shecht the oila. Okay. Remember, there are 4 principal avodas. There's shchita, there is kabbalah, receiving the blood, then there's the halacha, transporting the blood, and then there's the zrika, which is the zrika is the avodah mainly for the bailim. That's where his kapara is, the owner. So kabbalah, the same thing. See what it says, the lokach hakoyin midam hachatas. You should take the blood with dam hachat. Why spell out chatas again? To tell you that when you're taking the blood, have in mind that this is the chatas. So to take kabbalah the same chatas. We don't need a special pasuk for halacha because every kabbalah, and what do you do with the blood? You got to bring it to the mizbech. So every kabbalah automatically includes halacha. The ashkechan. So what do you know from here so far? Shchita, by chatas, kabbalah, zrika. They all have to be done for the sake of chatas. How do you know when you sprinkle the blood, it has to be done l'shem chatas? It says in pasuk that you should bring your carbon, you should bring your asham you should bring your chatas, and then it says there, the keeper olav hakoyin mechatos. The koyin will forgive him from your chatas. So why is it spelled mechatasa? Shetehei kapara l'shem chatas. And where does the kapara take place for the owner? The kohen is one who's doing all the activities till is the zrika. That's the kapara of balabas, and it has to be for a chatas. Okay, so all we know here is remember, there's 2 kinds of psulim. You had the wrong carbon in mind, or you had the wrong person in mind. So here we know. Shinui Kaidish, you had the wrong carbon in mind as possible. Also, we only know it once, so it's only a mitzvah. The chatzil, it has to be done correctly. We don't know yet that it's possible that it's ma'akiv. So first thing one wants to go through Ashkelon Shinui Kaidish, Shinui Bailam, and Haino Shinui Bailam as well. If you change the person is making it for. On Makra, it says in that very same pasuk. So first we dash and we stress the word chatasai, but also we already had before. It says Allah. Allah, that you have to have the right person in mind. And chaveira, we also learn out someone who, if you have in mind someone else doing a carbon which is similar to your carbon, then it passes it. If the other person brings a totally different carbon, like an oiler, it doesn't in any way interfere. So Allah, chaveira. So okay, what do we know from here? Ashkal and mitzvah. So we know from all this that you have to do the right thing. How do you know? Where's it written the second time that's ma'akiv? That Gemara says it could have said by saying chatas. We learned the drasha. It has to be the sake of chatas. Why say extra vav chatasoi? And we'll use it later by Nazar. We'll see what he dashes when the letter vav. So we'll use the same approach. Hachanami chatas chatasoi. Could have said mechatas. Said mechatasoi. His thing is an extra, whereas it's written again, second time. Okay. So what do we know from here? Says the Gemara. What we know from here is mitzvah b'shinui kodesh. So we have psukim by shinui kodesh, one pasuk. What does one pasuk tell you? L'chatchila is how you should do it. But we don't have a second pasuk to tell you that b'di'evet is possible. And then, by zika we have 2 psukim. By zika we have b'chiper olav b'chatas, and then the next shabav. So it's like double. So we know it's makir. But what do we know by shinui bailim? As all we know is a pasuk of zrika, because chipper, which stage of the avodas is the kapara? The zrika, the sprinkling. So we know uzrika b'shini bailim bein mitzvah lakiv. When it comes to zrika, there's a double chatas and chatasoi. So you have two questions. First of all, shini kodesh. How do you know that's makiv? And shini bailim. What about the three other avodas? How do you know b'chal even possible? So. So how do you know all other avodas shina kodesh if you change the name? That it's ma'akiv ubeshar avodas b'shina bailim, and the other three avodas when it comes to changing the owner bein l'mitzvah bein lakiv. I know it's awesome. Rabbi Yehuda said, you're right. Ask, we learn out from mechatas nazir. We learn out from chatas nazir. To see, it says by chatas nazir, the hikriv hakoyin lifnei Hashem, that the koyin should bring before Hashem, and it says va'osa es chatosoi. It says you should make your chatos and mesolosoi. All the activities. It says v'hikriv hakoyin va'osa. Also, which particular activity? All of them. So that's how you know it has to be lishma, and it's the second time. So therefore, the second time is ma'akiv. So it's going to fine. Ashkechon shinu kodesh. So you know from here, shinu kodesh, you change the name of the carbon. We have twice the two different circles. That's the psukim. So therefore, it's ma'akiv. The other three activities are changing the owner. How do you know that's possible? Skip the branches. Amar Abuna says one of the problems with kachim is because Allah is showing you to learn it is there are a lot of gesayis. Zevachim is not so bad, even though we have problems. When we get to some of the other masechtas, like Krisis and others, it's very difficult to learn because there's so many girsayos to work out what's the right girsa. It wasn't really learned through properly. Amar Abuna says, Rav Huna says, because it says in this pasuk, "V'hikriv hakoyin," it says, could have said also chatas. Why is it chatas? His chatas, his, and not somebody else's. So that's how you know shinu bailim for all the other activities. And then okay, so Gemara says, yeah. So Gemara Maskell Rabbi asked, and so how do you know it's makiv? Because we didn't compare it to the carbon zois total oil or shlamim. We compare it to shlamim, and like we had before, just like shlamim, they're all compared to each other lemitzvah. So too, when it comes to chat, they're all compared to each other la'akiv, because you already established that one of them, by zrika, shinei bailim, is not only a mitzvah to have the right person, it's also ma'akiv. So once you know that one of them is ma'akiv, and you learn out that also all the other activities has to be done correctly, so then we equate that what? That just like shlamim, all of them are exactly the same, so too by the other kabbanas, all of them should be exactly the same. That's how Rashi learns. Those disagree. All of them have to be exactly the same. So therefore, since by zrika it's ma'akiv, all the avodah is ma'akiv as well. Maskell and Ravina makes a question. Let me answer. If you could dash in the vav in that pasuk that it says chatosoi, the es oilosoi. What do you do with the vav from oilosoi? If vav is an Indian is a thing, what do you do with that vav? Let me answer. Oilosoi. My dasha could have said oilas. It says oilosoi. What do you dash over there? So you want to ask the question. If Ravina already is going to make it be so pedantic and asks, what do you do with other vavs? Well, in the pasuk further it says more. Well, Ravina minchas. It could have said minchas. It says minchasoi. Could have said nesach. It says nischoi. Why is he only asking from Eilasai? Why is he asking from the next pasuk who talks about the other things that come with it? My doshba. Why is he only asking that? So that doesn't bother. You know why? Ahumi Bailey, Taka uses the Russia. It says min chasam min iskayim. It says by the kabbanas of Sukkot that it says min chasam min iskayim. We darshan that their mincha and their nesachim can be brought anytime, even at night. A carbon can only be brought during the day, but it says min chasam without limiting it. Even at night, even a day later, even 2 days later, you can bring the carbon mincha. You can bring the nesachim later, and so on. And that's what the Rebbe says. The basis is why we can say Krishma in the morning without putting on tefillin, because it says if you bring a carbon without everything, without all the things, it's possible. But since by you can bring the nesachim 10 days later, we put on the tefillin later. That's good enough. So the only thing that the Rebbe actually changed in a minute if you could ever put into place. To put on tefillin, we say Krishma in the morning. So therefore, he uses when he uses the word where it says min chasoi. No matter when you bring it, it's still related to it as it's mincha. It's still related as it's nesach. He uses it, but my oilosoi. You're going to make a big deal out of the word chatosoi to teach you that you have to have the shini bailam as possible. So tell me, what are you going to do with oilosoi? So the Gemara, Allah, there's a lot of my dasha, but with dasha, that's question number one. Furthermore, mi gomri mahadodi. This passage is written by Nazir. How do you compare one chattas to another chattas? So what do you know? You see by Nazir that you have to have lishma. Maybe by Nazir you need lishma, and not by chattas chaylev. We always call a regular chattas is called chattas chaylev because Rashi says the most common avera people ate was treif. Sorry. Yeah, chaylev. So therefore, we call stam chattas is chattas chaylev. Chattas dam is much less, and other chattas are much less. So how can you learn?
That just because there were a lot of treifas that were geshachtim, or would that just
Dam we know is miyas. Remember we had the Gemara dam that was miyas. Nobody eats dam, and other vedas are like mamash and aveda. Eating is something you do every day, 3 times a day. So
the shuman,
they make mistakes. Exactly, they won't get it wrong. No, not lahachas. The whole thing is a shaydik. Yeah. So about a chattas here. So the question, me gomri madodi chattas chem chattas nozer legomri. You can learn chattas chem chattas nozer. Why not? I can argue as follows. You know why by nozer we're so strict? You need lishma. Shken yeshim adam machedim. You bring a whole series of carbons, not just one carbon. So chamer you have to be lishma. Chattas chem is just one carbon. Who said you need lishma? And generally speaking, neither can you learn nazir from chattas chaylev. It has a separate chumrah. Chattas nezir chaylev she can't cut us. By nazir, there's no cutters involved. You know, but by chattas chaylev, if you did b'meiz, you get cutters. If you ate chaylev b'meiz, so you can't learn from each other. What are you learning? Elam Rabba. You know, you're right. We don't learn from nazir. We learn from chattas mitzayda. What does it say by mitzayda? The chsiv, it says by mitzayda. The coin has to make the chattas. So osar coin that all asiyosef have to be lishma. So we can learn lishma by chattas from mitzayda. She calls it chattas. No, so all we know from there is ashka shina kodesh. Shina bailim and all. I know if you had the wrong person in mind. Or makra. It says in the same pasuk the chipat al hamitaheh Clark. The next word hamit. Who you mean mechaper? The one that needs a tara. The person of this carbon. So al matai is that, but al matai chaveira, clear. So that's how you know shina bailim, and then how you know la'akiv is you know that because Rashi says before from that pasuk zois have told loyla, you know that's like a second time you compare, and then okay fine. So you know vakati mitzvah also you can't compare to chayla. Remember that mitzvah there's no kodesh involved. Vakati mi yalfa madodi chatzat chayla machan shayla yav. You can learn chatzat chayla for the same reason. Sheken yesh imod domim machayim. There's a whole series of kabbanas, so maybe it's strictly you need lishma. And Chatzachev doesn't. Nor, generally speaking, nor Chatzas Mitzaydim with Chatzas Chayv Legam, you can't equate the two. She can't cut us. So you're okay, you're right. So you have Nozah, you have Mitzaydim, and you have Chaylev. And we're trying to learn Chaylev that Shina Kodesh and Shina Bailim is a problem. Well, you can learn from each individual, but maybe collectively, if you combine Nozah and Mitzaydim together, the Tzad HaShava is that Shina Bailim and Shina Kodesh is the problem. Let's learn Chaylev from both of them. So you want to know which one shouldn't it say, and we'll say it's extra. Let it not say by learn from those two. I'll tell you. They both have a chumrah in common that you need. It's a whole series of kabbanas. You can't learn chaylev from them. Let it not say the dinim b'chatas nazir. Learn from chaylev and from Mitzayda. That's a big cooler. You can be mid Naziris, you can come to me and go to a Rav and be Mata Neder. Because remember, Naziris is a Neder. We did have a big machlekes in the Rishonim in the beginning of Dorni whether Nazir is a Neder or a Dova, whatever. How do we understand Nazir? Is a Gavra, a Chepsa? But regardless, you can be shoyl on it. You can unravel the whole thing. You can't unravel Yeh today. There's nothing you can do about it. You're a Mitzayda, you can't do anything about it. So there's a cooler by Nazir. So how can you learn Nazir from the other ones that they take on the Chumras? So don't write by mitzvah, but taste malan can aim by medalus. The other ones is a fixed carbon. I'm saying mitzvah is asham is a carbon oil of the depending how wealthy you are, which is a big cooler. You can bring a carbon mincha, that's good enough. So therefore, if you knew dinim in the other katais, you couldn't learn mitzvah from them. So therefore, how do you know? Ella amakra. It says in pasuk. We compare to shlamim. Ma shlamim bein shina kodesh bein shina bailim. By a carbon shlamim, you need both. Being in lishma the mitzvah, at least by shlamim is l'chatchil, right? But the other we said that if you did like lishma, it's still a kosher animal, just not yaitza, but it's still kosher. So av chatas bein shina kodesh bein shina bailim being lishma the mitzvah. So we know at least you have a mitzvah there. Hilchach mitzvah mishlamim. And then Mahanach Kroy, all of these extra psukim that we had on the top of the page and so on, is la'akiv. Once you have an extra pasuk, we already know the basis. And the second one is being ma'akiv. Then we compare what? Just like Shlomo, they're all no different what Avodah is, so too no different what Avodah is. So what do we know here? Remember, there's another kind of a chatas oil v'yoyed. So we know a chatas chaylev. The ksibo it says l'chatas. It says in the pasuk here that what that you should b'shachat oisel l'chatas. You have to have lishma. But chatas da avodah zarah. What about a chatas da avodah zarah, which is not written in the parsha, it's written in Shlach? When we had a whole before in Haiti, the chatas avodah zarah is totally different, a different carbon. And what about the chatas, which is oil of the shmiyas hakoil, the three avedas that you bring a carbon oil of the year, not a fixed animal, fixed carbon, but it depends on your wealth. Shmiyas hakoil. If you know Adis and you say I have no testimony to share, and then turn out to be a liar, ubitus vasayim, you made a shvua, and you turn out to be you swore false. Or tumas migdash v'kedusha, of you or tummy, you walked in the base of migdash, or you ate kodesh. These three, you bring a chatas oil of the year. How do you know over there is the like sibu? And how do you know? Can you learn it from chatas chaylev and say just like here you need l'shma, it's ma'akev if you didn't, the same thing there. Says the Gemara, chatas davodas gechavim, no question. Asim chatas chaylev is the same. Shekein kares kemaisa. You did it amazing. You get kares. That's the same thing as chatas chaylev. But l'chayda, all the other ones, there's no kares. If you swore false, there's no kares. If you all these other ones, or you withhold testimony and you lie about it, you don't bring kares. Now that we've established that Sai Chatas Chelev and Sai Chatas Nazir and Sai Chatas Mitzvah, all three of them, you have to have Lishma. There's no particular, then the Tzad HaShavah is that all three of them is any Chatas needs Lishma. So therefore, even including, you don't need Kares because Nazir and Mitzvah have no Kares either. So and these other Chatos also require Lishma. They all require Lishma. Tana, but we learned Pesach. Okay, we finished with Chatas. Now we said by Pesach also if you had the wrong thing in mind, it's possible. But here we gave a window. The window is the time that you could have brought it. It is, and you and dark at night. If you had the wrong carbon in mind, it passes. What happens if afterwards you have the? This is a very interesting din. At Pesach, if you have the right carbon in mind, kosher. The wrong carbon in mind, possible. After that, if you have the right carbon in mind, it's possible. If you have the wrong carbon in mind, it's kosher. In other words, after the
shlomim, it'll be kosher.
Oh, we'll see later. Any carbon. You have in mind, any carbon is kosher. You have the wrong carbon, not kosher. If you have the right one, it's the wrong zman. It's possible. And we're going to ask now, how do we know that? Says the Gemara, talking about we learn Pesach bizman.
It's not shaykh to bring from Pesach. So you're not really bringing from Pesach.
The question is, for example, you can still bring a Pesach Sheni. So it's still the zman.
Say until Pesach Sheni.
For Pesach Sheni, you can still bring this very carbon.
On Pesach Sheni.
Yeah, but you would, let's say the second day of Pesach, you have the wrong carbon in mind. It's still shaykh to Pesach. What about Erev Pesach in the morning? We have one Tana who says in the morning, same thing applies, but the Chacham disagree. And they hold, or the day before that, according to everybody, it's possible. It's still row for carbon. We'll see. Yeah, exactly. So we'll see. So tell them Pesach Bismani Lishma, if you had in mind Pesach kosher. Shaloi Lishma, you had a wrong carbon in mind possible. Uvashai Maisa Shawan and the rest of it, Pungfakek. Lishma, if you had in mind a carbon Pesach possible. But Shaloi Lishma, if you did not have in mind a carbon Pesach kosher. But no, how do you know all this? Says the Gemara, Amar Abu Shmuel, the father of Shmuel said, Amar Kra, it says in the pasuk, the im min hatzoin karbonai. If it says in the pasuk, if in the beginning of a chumash, if min hatzoin karbonai, if from the tzoin, the sheep is your carbon, li zevach shlamim la Hashem. Now the carbon shlamim can be anything, it can be a behemoth also. Why say only tzoin? So it's talking about if there's a carbon, then you can only do it with tzoin, which is the carbon Pesach. You can only do it with a goat or with the lamb. It's only a carbon Pesach. What happens, it sometimes turns into a shlamim. When? It's the wrong zman. That's something like they can only use tzoin for, will turn into a shlamim. Says the Gemara, okay. Ema shlamim in midachin line. Maybe only if you had in mind a shlamim, okay, then it's the carbon Pesach and chalamai becomes a shlamim. But if you had in mind a carbon chatas, a carbon nasham, carbon oila, maybe it doesn't work because the pasuk is liz zevach hashlamim. Liz zevach, the word liz zevach, it doesn't say iman atron kabani shlamim. It says liz zevach. Zevach means any carbon. The rabbis call zevach. Any saying, okay. So let's say like this: if you had in mind a shlamim, it becomes a shlamim. If you had in mind an oila, it should become an oila. Let's say whatever carbon you had in mind, that's what it becomes. Whatever carbon you shechted, let it become like that carbon. It would read that if you had in mind a shlamim, it becomes a shlamim, and v'zevach, you had in mind any other carbon, it becomes any other carbon. Kedar, like you just said. But hashta d'chsiv li zevach shlamim. Now that it says li zevach shlamim, the kol d'shachilei shlamim level. No matter what you shechted, what you had in mind, shlamim, it turns into a shlamim. Maybe you know. Let it say lezevach is a klal, shlamim is a prat, and what's the name of a klal prat? Klal prat ein b'chal mashem prat. Let's limit it shlamim in midach eloi. Maybe using the rules of klal prat, let's say that only if you had a minus shlamim is kosher, and anything else is possible. Midach eloi. What it says in the pasuk zevach shlamim la Hashem. Hashem is all encompassing. Any carbon that's la Hashem, how do we call? That's why any carbon you had in mind is good enough. For the Gemara, we had the same thing before. He said, when's the klal prat klal? The second klal is as encompassing as the first one. But here, the second klal is far more expansive. Why? The first one says zevach, only things that require shchita. La Hashem is any carbon you bring to Hashem. It could be a mincha, it could be an oif. An oif is not shchita, an oif is malika. Use your thumb. So therefore, the first klal is mar bezvachim, and only animals, or only thing that requires shchita, and klal basel Hashem, kol del Hashem, klal basel Hashem, kol del Hashem. I feel loifus, I feel menachas. It's not the same thing. What answers back? The same answer we had before. Rabbi Shmuel, who taught us all of these rules about klal prat, he says you don't need the second klal to be exactly the first klal. He's still called, even though the second one might be more expansive, doesn't matter. It's expansive, so therefore, because we're only medamet to the prat anyway. What are we including? Only what's similar to the prat. It's irrelevant that the second klal is more expansive than the first. Klal prat, klal you have to get prat. Ma prat mefudesh shalei l'shmei v'kosher. Av kosher shalei l'shmei v'kosher. And prat, okay, it has to be similar to the prat. What do we know about the prat shlamim? It's an animal that you voluntarily donate it. So maybe if you had in mind a chatas, you can't voluntarily donate a chatas. No, so maybe they're not included. So maybe if you had in mind with the current Pesach to be a chatas, this should be possible. Only if you had in mind an oil or a shlamim. If you had in mind a chatas, shouldn't work. Elad, when answer, you're right. Nothing to do with klal prat. The zevach ribuyu means like this. When is a klal prat? You have one word that says b'chol tav and nafshecha, whatever you desire. So it's a klal. No, it's pashna taichin. The pasuk is very inclusive. Then you have a limiting, a boker, and then you have another expansive one. Fine. Over here, it could have said the word shlamim. Why do you even add the word zevach? The Torah is putting it there to be marbe. Nothing to do with klal prat klal. The word is extra. If it's extra, it's a ribuy. Not the ribuy means ribuy, it's not to do with that. It's a ribuy. So therefore, we're marbe any animal. The ribuyu, emel. So I'm going to ask, fine. So forget klal prat klal. Before you answer me, it has to be similar to the prat, right? Emel kol the shachil to have a kavase. Before you have to be similar to prat, it turns to the shlamim. But now that you tell me it's a ribuy, let us say that whatever animal you had in mind, it should become that animal. If you took a pesach and you had in mind an oila, let it become an oila. You had in mind a chatas, let it be a chatas. Rabbi said, I'll give you a different reason why. You know why? What are we doing? We're taking a carbon Pesach, which is kachim, and we're pushing it away. We're rejecting it. So what can we replace it with? You can only replace it with another carbon that you can eat.
You can't get oil or something.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't do oil because you can't eat it. You can't do a chatas v'ashem because you don't eat it. The balbas doesn't eat it. And therefore can only be a shlamim. Talking about but a chatzah can be eaten. We're now saying that we learn out that you can that a korban Pesach can be any carbon you had in mind. Good enough is when the word zevach is not klal prat, it's a ribu, it's an extra word, marbe everything. So now we're asking a bazei. Having in mind any carbon you want should be good enough because no longer klal prat klal, just a ribu, an extra word. So we answer that no, because logic. If you're going to replace kachim with other kachim, it has to be similar. In what way? That it can be eaten. Okay, so you can't have a mind in oila. It turns into a shlamim. If you had a mind in oila, it turns into a shlamim. What about osham v'chatas? They're also could be eaten. So I ask him, what doichin 3-4 on the top? Doichin kachim and l'chol adam. Korban Pesach can be eaten by anybody. Eitzel kachim l'chol adam. If we're going to replace it with a korban shlamim, anybody can eat it. But then doichin kachim l'chol adam. Eitzel kachim l'chol adam. You want to replace it with osham v'chatas? Only a kohen can eat it. That's not included. Nobody can eat it.
The Pesach
Yeah, but every year you try it to their Pesach. Exactly. Exactly, that's it. And Rabbi Yossi says similar, but he said the word is Rabbi Yossi Avinam in the same. We're still talking about the same subject. That we're going to replace kachim. You want to know why it's limited to shlamim? Doichin kachim kalim eitzel kachim kalim. A carbon pesach can be eaten all over Yerushalayim. You're going to replace it now with something else. Shlamim, eat it all over Yerushalayim. The ain doichin kachim kalim eitzel kachim kachim. But you cannot turn it into a carbon oil, a chatas, or nashon. These are all kachim kachim. You can't go up. Maskula. So now we're going to ask a series of questions. There are other kachim kalim. At least if you, let's say you had in mind, it should be like a b'chor. You had in mind, it should be like ma'isa behema. Kachim kalim. Let it be like kachim kalim. So you know, maskula. Let us say shachte l'shem ma'isa. You took the carbon pesach. You said the only carbon it becomes a shlamim. Now shlamim has all this din. You need nesachim. You have to pour the libations. You need tenufas chazei v'shoik. You have to wave it. What happened? You had in mind ma'isa behema. It's kachim kalim. Let it be ma'isa behema, and you don't have to then do the tenufa. You don't have to have nesachim. Be different in him. Is levin ma'isa l'mayich chesed lo lebayin nesachim. You don't need nesachim or the tenufa. And number one, number two, ulemilka leb below yigoil. If you, it says the pasuk, you're not allowed to redeem ma'isa behema, and we learn out it means we'll learn. You're not allowed to, it means you're not allowed to sell it. You don't have that isa by shlamim. So therefore. Let the din be that it should be ma'aseh b'challah, because you just said kachim kalim cannot become kachim. But l'chayda it should be kachim kalim. On Makro, we have a meat. It says in the pasuk, "Asidi, woman, asidi yid kodesh." Zeh ma'aser v'nachamaisa. Only this is the only way you can make ma'aser by counting and get number 10 or 9 becomes 10, 11 becomes 10. But you cannot have a mind, a korban pesach and turn it into ma'aser behema. Okay, we're still continuing. Okay, fine. But ema shachti l'shem chayr. You took the korban pesach and you had in mind, I want this to be a korban b'chayr. It's a kachim kalim. Let it become a b'chayr. Might have come in if it's shlam b'chayr. I'm surprised Gemara doesn't say one enough minutes on all these things. The time, how long you eat it for? Shlam 2 days in the night, and b'chayr and all these things is only 1 day in the night. Mais is 1 day in the night. Anyway, so Gemara levekib chayr lemai hilchasa. What's the difference? The loy leboy in the sachin, same thing. You don't need the sachin by b'chayr, number one, and inami or the lace for the koinim. B'chayr you can only give to koinim. Big difference. If you tell me it's shlamim, everybody can eat it. Tell me it's a b'chayr, only a koinim. And you're swat of Rabbi Yossi that kachim kalim can become kachim kalim. No, let it become a chayr. So we answer also b'chayr nami. B'chayr has a gzeira shava that we learn b'chayr from Ma'aser. It says v'habarte kol peterechem, and it says that b'cholas asidi. It says chol ma'aser b'gtzon asher yaver tachas shava. To make a gzeira shava, talking about Ma'aser, you cannot only. This is the only method of coming Ma'aser. B'chayr also, this is the only way of becoming a b'chayr. It has to be peterechem. The Ma'aser gomer. Okay, so about the third question. Why do we say? Why don't we say shachta l'shem t'mura lehevet t'mura? You had in mind t'mura. You're not allowed to swap an animal for another animal, a carbon for another animal. But if you did, hayahu t'mura siyekaidish. So you had in mind it should be t'mura of whatever the animal is. First of all, you'll get malchus now because you just made it t'mura. Or inami make a level. Also, you have these two. You're not allowed to sell it. You're not allowed to redeem. You're not allowed to sell it, which you don't have by shlamim. Omar Mazutra, no. There again, we have a limit. Only it and its exchange. Zmut tumura, ve'ein achat tumura. We'll just continue this full part so you ends before don't pause. Again, you're telling me kachim kalim can become kachim kalim. There's a carbon taida. And we learned before that taida and shlema two different things. A carbon taida, if you had a minor taida, it'd be like a taida, and mine have kamina. You got to bring 40 chalas. You got to bring the 40 chalas. If it's a shlamim, it's just a shlamim. A taida, you have that. Again, why doesn't the Gemara bring here the time period? Me, that's only day and night. Me, midi, Gemara says, very simple.
Would have been much shorter.
Yeah, exactly. Then right away would be no questions. Whatever, at least it'll be the same thing. Me, midi, the Pesach gufa. Loy boy lechem, the current Pesach itself doesn't require any additional, loaves. Umoyse boy lechem, but if you swap this original carbon to something else, you need now something additional. But of course you do. A shlamim needs nesachim, and current Pesach doesn't. So you see the problem of having additional is not a problem. So what's the wrong with having additional chalas? Or when you swap the shlamim, you need nesachim. So this is what I meant to ask. Is there anything? The moise toida. That's your toida. You brought a toida, you lost it, so you brought another one. You set aside toida, you lost, you brought another one, then you found the original. You bring up the original one as a toida as well. but you don't bring the chalas anymore. So the original toida, if you bring it again, you don't bring chalas, but a carbon pesach that becomes a toida, you do bring chalas, klapnisht. Like boy, the moisa toida answer the moisa the asylum alma, but a leftover an extra toida from someone else from pesach. Boy, lechem doesn't lechem.
And in the whole,
Yeah.
can't easily become it.
Okay, pause for one.